state of mind yet?
It's it's just been a wild ride to get here. And Paul, as always, good to be here. Looking forward to being at NextGen. But yeah, it's been a great couple of days, really busy, and been out in the field talking to growers and hearing kind of their story. But excited to talk about silage today.
Yeah, we wanted to really dedicate just a whole 30-minute episode just towards silage, mainly because that's where we've seen the largest return for the grower. And I think for multiple reasons that we'll get into. So, Tom, why don't you just start off by telling us kind of what you've seen with the silage results and
Sure.
in the High Plains area?
Yeah, I'll take you back to kind of how we jumped into this. Was my first year, 23, the harvest season 2023 was my first year at the company, and we were doing those recent events tests, which we don't have to get into detail. But out of those tests, one of the metrics that we would measure was biomass, and we saw in the high 90s, close to 100%, a biomass increase with crops that were treated with Pivot Bio. And as we went through the summer looking at that and seeing the frequency of the winds, having come from a previous company, my focus there was silage. I was thinking, wow, what does this mean in terms of tonnage for a silage grower? So with about 3 weeks before we were getting into the silage chop season, we thought, well, the best way we can go in there is do the primitive 1/1000th of an acre treated versus untreated. And it was just strictly to see if we could get repeatability. And we did 6 growers with a short window to go. We can talk about the setup and everything. It was really kind of fun. But we had 6 wins, 6 out of 6. And it's like, okay, remember, as a former science teacher, repeatability is awesome. But we had anything from 0.7 ton increase to 1.8 ton. And that was the start. We were like, okay, we didn't ring any bells. We just thought, I think we're on to something here that we really should set up going into the next growing season and see if we can really capture those kind of wins using other ways to measure, the chopper data. And then that's where you came on board and joined us in that next season, getting scale tickets and things that really corroborated our story.
Right. Yeah, it's hard. And there's a lot of skepticism around, trials where it's just 1/1000th of an acre. Or, because you're comparing 33 plants to 33 plants or whatever the population
Right.
is, and you're really looking at a very small scale comparison compared to when you can do a whole pass, weigh trucks, and then compare that in a side by side. So that's kind of where I wanted to make sure we got larger scale data, real field comparisons.
Exactly why we didn't ring the bell, right?
Right.
We're just like Paul and others. I think this is something we should really go after. So, yeah, you coming in there and say, let's take it to a higher level and larger scale. We can elaborate on that. That's when it really got fun.
Yeah, and it was worth putting in the extra effort to make sure we got that data, because when you're looking at a 0.7 ton increase, at least a 0.7 ton increase, and silage is worth $35 to $40 a ton, you're looking at a pretty good ROI. For adding a product on top of the normal nitrogen program, that costs anywhere from $15 to $18 typically at the grower level. So with the Reese-Nevins test, I do want to touch on that a little bit, because I think that's helped me kind of validate the nitrogen that Pivot Bio products are supplying to the corn plant. And so with the Reese-Nevins test, what we're doing is we're taking several different chlorophyll readings with the CCI meter. So if you guys are familiar with like Green Seeker technology, enrich strips, and that technology has been out for a while. We're really just measuring the chlorophyll content in the leaf. And then we're also weighing whole plants. So we're chopping them off, 5-6 inches above the ground, which is where the silage is going to be chopped at. And then we're weighing that whole plant. Okay, and we've done this at different growth stages. We've done it as early as V8, and we've done it as late as R3, R4. Okay, so wide variety of growth stages tested, and usually what we'll see is a little bit of a biomass increase where the Pivot Bio was applied, and sometimes that's added on top, and sometimes we reduce a little bit of nitrogen with silage, but typically not the full 40 pounds. And the reason being is the way excess nitrogen is stored in the plant is stored in the leaves. And each hybrid does that a little bit differently. You've got some hybrids that really focus on storing that extra nitrate that's available that the plant uptakes, stores it in the leaves. And a lot of the hybrids now are really designed, especially with certain seed brand companies, they've designed, that really dark green, healthy looking leaf, which is a sign that that hybrid's tendency is to store that excess nitrate instead of not taking it up in the first place. So by putting a little extra nitrogen out there on silage, we're getting that extra tonnage increase because that plant wants to store that excess nitrogen. And a lot of times on the chlorophyll, we'll see a little bit higher level of chlorophyll content in that comparison where the Pivot Bio microbes were applied, but sometimes it's a little bit less too. And at first, we were kind of concerned about that, and then we learned that it's really the fact that there's a bigger leaf, a bigger plant, so it's diluting that chlorophyll content. And it's the same with tissue samples. If you're sending a tissue sample into a lab at V3, you should be a lot higher of a nitrogen percent or a nitrogen content in that leaf versus if you're later on in the year, because that nitrogen is then spread out through the plant leaves.
Right. We saw that too when the very first trial with the CCI meter. We ran into a couple of go, wait a minute, did we really win? Did we lose? Because the number was lower. But then you looked at the leaf and then a plant density perspective, and a much wider leaf gets compared there too. But again, the biomass I didn't see too many losses in that at all. And I wanted to point out too, when you're talking about that thousandths of an acre, the very first time it's like, okay, where do you start? I think is really important. I think the first time I showed a picture, somebody responded, I can go pick the best plants out of the treated versus the untreated. That's an easy picture to make. And I want people to understand is that as we did this with the 17.4 feet, we had the little chain, hook it on the first plant. There's your distance to collect 32 or 33, whatever the plant density was, get that many plants. You grab a hold of whatever first plant you pick, that's your first plant. Now, this is in recent evidence because we took 6. Grab the first one, cut it at the height you said, then count 6 plants down the row, and whatever's there, you cut it. There's no cherry picking. And that's what made it fun for me was now there's no bias here. Once you start, the next 6 plants, you get what you get. And if we're on a treated side and we have a dwarf or whatever's there, you take it. So to see those wins against doing it as effectively as we could and unbiased also made it exciting to see the data because it was performing.
Yeah, another thing I like to do as far as those small comparisons in a field is walk out there with the customer, and I've got the shovel and I say, all right, you pick the plant. Okay, we're in the treated or we're in the untreated, you pick the plant. And it's funny because sometimes I'll have customers that'll kind of step back a little bit and look at plants and like, okay, how can I make this turn out the way I want to? And it was cool seeing even with a little bit of a bias there from the grower perspective. 9 out of 10 times we were still getting that biomass increase regardless of the plants, even when I wasn't the one choosing which plants to cut. And when we started doing those comparisons, we realized that excess nitrogen that's adding to the biomass over 90% of the time wasn't always translating to yield. And that reason being is because that yield in bushels per acre. And the reason being is that excess nitrogen was being added to the leaves in the stalk. And we were seeing anywhere from a 20 to 35% increase in stalk diameter when we started measuring stalk with the caliper. So just very consistent results in adding to that biomass. And at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily correlate with bushels per acre, just because there's a lot more later in the season that takes that plant has to be functioning at a high level to translate or to transport that nitrate into the ammoniacal form and then put it to the grain. So there's a longer process there that happens within the plant. But we're very confident in the silage results. And that's why I wanted to talk about just focus on silage because, we always talk about in our trial results, well, there's nothing works 100% of the time. But
Right.
Pivot Bio on silage is pretty darn close to 100% of the time.
This is one of those where be careful how you want to communicate with me, Mr. Grower, Mrs. Grower, whoever you are, because it's important. We did the testing. This wasn't data that we took from some third party. Once we saw that first year experience, we said, wait a minute, let's go do it right. Let's go do it differently. Let's do it on a larger scale. But Paul, I watched you. I was with you, and you're running the 4-wheeler, and you're grabbing the scale ticket, and you're getting to the next truck. And for us, we're there with the chopper, riding with the chopper, looking at the monitors, and we're doing much larger acres. And we put a lot of time and effort into it. And I don't know about you, but it's kind of like Reese and Evans. Once you start seeing this pattern, you get super excited, and you just have the swagger, like, I know we're going to win this thing. And at the end of the day, when we put it on paper, this is a huge, huge piece for people looking for where's that advantage for me out there. I mean, we know it's a tough ag economy. We know what prices are. If you're not listening to this podcast and taking it serious because we did the work, I'm looking at you and remember all those days where you and I were in the field and a couple other reps. It's a lot of time. Nobody asked us to do it. Why did we do it? Why would we go spend that time to go collect this data? So growers, if you're listening, if you grow silage, this effort is for you, period. And if you don't believe it, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned repeatability, and that was something we did all across Northeast Colorado in 2024. Was get on. I think it was over 10 different locations.
I'm looking at the sheet here, Paul. There were 16 locations from the ones you were involved in. You helped us with the eastern side, but we went from Ray all the way to the Front Range in Longmont and compared that data. I know yours might have in your grower meeting a little smaller sample, but we can share both of those. But I've got those 16 trials.
So the mission of Pivot Bio is really about serving our growers, providing a better performing product with higher value. Thank you to the growers. This is not an easy job. They're managing a lot of risk, a lot of variability. To do it in a more sustainable way, which we hope we can provide lower risk and higher return, is something that we want to serve them. So thank you to all of our growers that make that possible. And our job is to serve our customers, and we focus on what we can control.
I think with silage, there's still that question of, okay, I'm adding another expense. What kind of ROI am I getting out of this? And we kind of talked about that average increase of, I'm very confident in saying, a 1 ton increase,
100%,
which is about a 2.5 time return on, the investment of adding Pivot Bio to that fertility plan. So really, really good results, even adding an expense, which is a little bit different approach than what we've talked about in the past with with wheat or with grain corn, where we're wanting to be a part of that nitrogen program and replace synthetic nitrogen. So kind of a different approach with silage, and where we've seen the best results.
You and I may differ a little bit because we had a lot of ours had replaced, 30 pounds. Mm-hmm. And so and I'll stick to that because I can't change my data sheet. Each one of those has the amount that was replaced. So if I came from a replacement perspective, which I will, you get two ROIs, if you will, comparing the price of today's nitrogen, even last year too, 30 pounds. Let's do simple math. If, let's say, $16 an acre for our product. And right now, well, let's go by the pound. Either way, easy math, $16 an acre compared to 30 pounds at, let's say $28, $25 an acre, kind of in that range is where nitrogen is trending right now, and the trend is up. So where are we at? $9 to $10 safely in a nitrogen replacement advantage. I'm confident with that. 30 pounds. So there's your $10. And then, like you said, $30 to $40 standing in the field silage value. Let's give it $35. $45 an acre, because you said 1 ton you're confident with. I almost want to put a guarantee. If you don't get it, I don't know how we didn't get it. 1 ton would be my expectation. So I would say, let's go after this thing at $45 ROI right now, today. But we'll get into some of the others that it trended higher than that when I share the average of year 2.
Right. We've worked with feedlots, but also some dairies in Colorado, and I think one thing dairies are always very consistent on is, okay, our quality needs to be there, digestibility. What's that milk per ton? What's that milk per acre? So what have you seen? We've kind of talked about the tonnage side, but what have we seen from a digestibility and kind of a feed quality side?
Well, it's important to note that the first time we did this in that 23, we actually brought a chopper, a wood chipper, if you will, and we took both samples, chopped it, and sent it right to the labs to get the feed quality analytics on it. We did that year 2. We did that year 3. And then here in year 3, we have also brought in a consulting firm to corroborate our data, whose specialty is feed quality, to talk about what kind of quality feed are we adding value, are we taking away from it? Because here's one of the questions. Let's go back to what a grower is going to say. Well, the reason there's more tons is because there's a dry matter difference. Everything is compared to the same dry matter, and we're still getting the same tonnage results. And from a feed quality standpoint, we had a slight uptick in starch. We also, the NDF 30 numbers were better. At the end of the day, and you can really get lost in those analytical 4-page feed quality. It depends on what's the dairy person looking for. It's all there, but at the end of the day, we added value. We certainly didn't take away from it. So feed quality is not compromised at all.
This Pro Box has enough seed to plant 125 acres of corn. Now, if you wanted to put 40 pounds of nitrogen on those acres, you'd need 1,200 gallons of anhydrous, or 1,500 gallons of UAN, or 5 tons of urea. What if you had the nitrogen you need already on seed? Pivot Bio is the first company to apply nitrogen on seed. The nitrogen you need, now on seed, from Pivot Bio.
As an agronomist, I know there's very few blanket recommendations I make for guys. There's usually, just 1 or 2 products out there that I think make sense on, a large majority of acres. And the Proven 40 and the Proven G3 is one that makes sense on every silage acre, just because we have seen those consistent, repeatable results, and a 2 to 3x ROI.
Yeah, I think here's one. I've got to share this because it's funny. It wasn't funny for the competitor who went to one of our silage growers and said, we have the same bacteria that Pivot Bio does, and ours is cheaper. And the grower said, well, let's do a test. Let's put it side by side. And we could see it during the growing stage. It goes back to what we talked about, gene-edited microbes. They did have the same bacteria, not gene-edited. So this was in year one. The trial against the competitor, it was a 12.5-ton advantage at that field. We knew it was going to be ugly for them because both companies, us and the no-name company, they started to see it too. We flew drones and like, you guys are really ahead of us. But when we measured it, the Pivot Bio proved that a gene-edited microbe is the only one that's going to supply that kind of nitrogen in around synthetic nitrogen with a 12.5-ton. We kicked that out, by the way. So when you hear the final average of year two, we had to kick that outlier out of it so that we didn't compromise the truth of how many average tonnage did we get across the board. But that was the very first test of year two, and it was pretty staggering.
Yeah, and I wasn't there on that one. Didn't the other company like come and even pick which plants?
Yeah, it was. There was two of them. They showed up and they had a university logo on one side of the shirt, and then the biological company's name was on the other side of the shirt. And they were giddy. They were excited that we're going to get on this on these acres. We're going to have a good test. So you had university and company there. And when we went out, said, look, I would prefer you go pick the plants or pick where, because remember, we have to take the same number of plants, a little different than Reese Nevins. So if the population's 32,000 plants per acre, you go get 32, I'll go get 32. And I said, you go get your 32 where you feel comfortable, where it's in your test plot. And if I showed you that picture of the two piles side by side, once we both got out of the field and plopped them down before we put them on the scale, this is the truth. The first question was, so what is Pivot Bio? Because there was no question. The grower saw it, but when we weighed it and saw that advantage, it was fun, but not fun for the folks who showed up for a party. It rained on their parade.
So with silage, I mean, it really is one of those few instances where it's we feel very confident in what we've seen in the field over 3 years of testing that, if you're growing silage in Colorado, regardless of your history in manure or your synthetic nitrogen applied, Pivot Bio should be on those acres. And the other benefit from Pivot Bio's microbes is that the nitrogen that it's supplying to the plant is in that ammoniacal form, and so it's not just getting stuck in the biomass and requiring plant energy to convert that from the nitrate form to the ammoniacal form. So it's readily usable in the plant to build the proteins and everything that goes into that the feed quality aspect.
Sure. And if you really have to go back and think about where is this nitrogen being fixed and supplied, and it's literally on the plant tissue of the root. We're talking, this small scale energy factory or fixation factory, if you will, and you can't get any closer. And you talk about manure, no two manures are the same, even in the dairy liquid that they put out. Well, then you've got the feedlot manure, the dry manure, which is actually even tougher because it takes longer for that to break down and mineralize. You need temperature, you need moisture. But between all the manures, which you get when you have Pivot Bio on the root at the time of germination, is you've got the nitrogen source you need to start building that bigger root mass that then can take advantage of that nitrogen that's in the manure later as it starts to do its job. But most of the trials that we did in year two, all of them had some type of manure application on those.
Yeah, I'm excited going into 2026 here. Getting a lot of comparisons with forage sorghum too. I know just with the price of corn and where synthetic fertilizer has skyrocketed to since the Iran conflict. Now we're looking at, okay, maybe we need to consider other crops. And so forage sorghum, something in our area, Northeast Colorado, that there's probably going to be more acres of and less corn silage acres. So that's something we're going to get a really good look at on how Pivot Bio performs on those acres as well. Adding to that biomass, creating a bigger factory, a bigger plant.
I would say, Paul, what we need to do, because you just nailed it, we have seen forage sorghum anecdotal data. You know, we have a couple of growers that one was irrigated, one was dry land, and I'm just telling you, next year when we have actually collected that data, this really needs to be one of the first episodes because it's a huge advantage in these sorghum sedan grasses and stuff. I would argue that any kind of forage, even those that are, we don't want to get too far off of silage, but we build a bigger plant. So let's take a look at grazing wheat, any kind of haylage, or chopping your barley or things like that. Any kind of those forage crops, the tonnage is there. So I think you could safely say, make it a really simple mantra. Pivot Bio equals tonnage with feed quality not being compromised.
I think that's a good note to end it on. So if you want to look at all these trial results, you can find them on my website, nextgenfertilizers.com, and Pivot Bio also has their own trial result website as well. I think it's typically, I think it's focused around grain corn, but pivotbioprovenit.com is another good resource. If people are interested in learning more and kind of looking at all these trial results, because at the end of the day, if it's not backed by field results, there's a lot less credibility around it. So that's one thing Pivot Bio and NextGen has focused a lot of time and resources on gathering the data and really supporting those claims of, proven 40 equals more tonnage with over a 95% win rate.
And you'll see they do have silage data has been collected from pretty much out here in the West all the way up through New York. And you'll see that number maybe not as high in the Midwest, but it's still pushing in and around a ton, 0.9 across an average of the entire country. So it maintains its win rate and consistency across the country too.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Tom, for coming on.
Good to be here.
Talking about silage.
Yeah. Thank you.